What is a tabletop role-playing game? This may seem rather obvious at first glance, but it's actually a pretty difficult question with a grey, complex answer. By now, most people who've never played a tabletop RPG in their life have at least heard of D&D and seen it depicted on TV. They know that dice are involved, and that players control the actions of their characters. Maybe they've listened to a popular podcast like Critical Role or Adventure Zone. But even if you're an experienced gamer, it's worth asking yourself this question. What is a tabletop RPG? It's interesting to me that we specify RPGs as tabletop, to separate them from video games. But do you really need a table to play a tabletop RPG? Well, no, you don't in many cases. This may be why we also have the term pen and paper RPG. That works too. But regardless of the term you want to use, there are assumptions being made about how the game is played. There's an implicit assumption that a table is the space of play, or in the case of pen and paper, that writing and reading is a key aspect of the game, literacy. This may seem really pedantic, but bear with me, there is a purpose to all this. Have you ever played an RPG with no table, or without any written material on hand? I'd venture a decent number of us have. At its most basic, an RPG looks like this. I try to open the door. It's locked. I try and pick it. You aren't very good at lockpicking. It doesn't work. There are no bonuses, no rolls, no written rules or character sheets. If you want to step up from this, you might toss a coin every once in a while. A friend of mine used to play that way with his younger niece. This is the kind of thing you might have done as a kid, and as far as I'm concerned, it's a role-playing game. This example shows how different tabletop RPGs are from board games and video games. These days, computers and phones are becoming a commonplace tool in tabletop games, and at some point, that might blur the lines between tabletop and video games. While you can still play a TTRPG with no electronics, you certainly can't play a video game with no electronics. Computers are supplementary to tabletop role-playing games. They aren't necessary, at least not yet. I think it's significant that some video games still get called RPGs or MMORPGs, because this sometimes affects what people expect from them, even though they don't have a lot in common with tabletop games. Funny enough, the main difference between something like an MMORPG and a tabletop RPG isn't how much roleplay you're doing. You can play D&D almost purely as a tactical game, and guess what? You'd still be playing a role-playing game. I'll talk more about that in a later video. The major difference is whether the game world is a preset entity, or something which is being created in response to the player's actions, in real time. Someday, maybe AI will be able to do that.
What is it, some sort of computer game?
In a sense, except it uses the most powerful processor known to man, the human mind.
But for now, you're stuck with your carbon-based, water-filled meat bag of an analog computer for a GM, if your tabletop RPG even has a GM, because even that is optional. Board games are also different from tabletop RPGs for the same reason. The game world you play in is a preset entity. It exists in the rulebook, and changing anything about it mid-play can be cause for a fistfight. Board games are about objective goals. RPGs are about subjective goals, at least in the intention of their designs. In a board game, you achieve a goal preset by the game rules in order to win. In an RPG, the goal is to have fun, and having fun means fulfilling personal goals. These goals that are built into the game shouldn't be confused with a player's personal goals. Someone playing a board game may not be trying to win, they may be trying to prevent someone else from winning, piss people off, or get away with cheating, but the game rules have a win condition, and the game does not function as intended unless at least some players subscribe to this single preset goal in a board game. An RPG does not require its players to seek out the same goal as one another to function in its intended manner, which might seem counterintuitive, given that we often think of RPGs as collaborative. There are 3 players and a GM in this game. Player 1 wants to kill monsters. Player 2 really likes the GM's world building and just wants to feel immersed in a different world. Player 3 wants to do a funny voice for a character and make everyone smile.
I hope you guys don't find that song annoying because I'm committing to it.
Each player came into this game with different goals, but I venture this game could be quite fulfilling for all of them if the GM is skilled enough to deliver what the players want and allows space for these goals to be fulfilled. The GM is a little different. The GM likely has 2 equally important goals: to facilitate an enjoyable session for each of the players, and also perhaps to feel like the world they created is real to them. In some role-playing game books, it might say that the goal of the game is to have fun. I would argue fun is something you get by completing goals. You had fun because you beat the bad guys. You had fun because you really felt in character. And notice that fun can arise out of process or result. But even fun might be too narrow a word for what players and GMs look for in a role-playing game. Some people want to be scared, or angry, or sad, or get catharsis for something terrible that happened in their childhood.
Fondue, your father left you when you were young, right?
Yeah, but I like to be the one to share that.
I, for one, take great delight in being emotionally eviscerated at the gaming table. It's safe to say that most people want to have fun, but keep in mind that there are other possibilities. As a fellow player of mine likes to say, fun? I didn't come here for fun. I came here for stories. What we can gather from this is that tabletop role-playing games are about constructing space. Space in which players and GMs are free to pursue personal goals and find fulfillment in their own way. The most amazing thing about these games is that they not only allow for deviation from the norms of play, they encourage it. They provide space. Tabletop role-playing games are not the roads and signs that point the way, just the space where you can put up whatever signs you want, and then choose to ignore them anyway. In a certain line of academic thinking, tabletop role-playing games fall under the category of literature as performance. They are pieces of writing that expect a performance from the reader, so to speak. A choose-your-own-adventure book is literature as performance. You are required to make decisions in order to read it. These decisions are part of its end product, a culmination of the literature and the specific nature of its reader. There are poems that function in this way, and they are considered high art. But I've never heard anyone say that Hackmaster is high art. But it's true, it is art. The designer of the game is an artist, the GM is an artist, and the players are artists. What happens at the table is art. However short-lived its existence is. A lot of people say that the system itself isn't the game is what happens at the table. I disagree. Both are the game. Just as music is music when played aloud, it is also music when silent on a page.